To help us get an answer to that question, we are glad to have the Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli, is with us. He is the author of a brand new book just released called The Last Line of Defense. Mr. Cuccinelli, welcome to today's Issues.
Good to be with you all.
Tell us something about, number one, why you wrote the book, The Last Line of Defense, which, by the way, is published by Random House, and tell us in the battle against some of the President Obama's initiatives, where does the battle stand today here at the end of February 2013?
Well, we wrote The Last Line of Defense to share with folks the role the states have been playing, more so than most any time in our lifetimes, in pushing back against the federal government's invasion of our liberty and trampling of the Constitution. And unfortunately, it's pretty rampant. The timing is very good because the beginning of a second term of a president is when they typically get juiced up, if you will, even beyond their first term, about being more aggressive, more pugnacious, and in the case of this president's administration, breaking the law more. And just last month, we saw them lose a constitutional law case with the president's appointments to the National Labor Relations Board, which were found not to be recess appointments as he had claimed, and so they were knocked off the board. Also last month, we in Virginia beat the EPA, which I refer to as the Employment Prevention Agency because they're so good at that, in a water case. And my co-plaintiff in that case was the Democrat Board of Supervisors of our largest county, Fairfax County, with 1 million people in it. So these are not this is just not Republicans versus Democrats in the courts. Both of my lawsuits with the EPA have Democrat co-plaintiffs, for instance. This is about preserving the rule of law, one of the most foundational aspects of what makes America different, that the law applies to us all the same, including the president and his administration. And as we see the states have more and more success pushing back on the federal government, unfortunately, I think we're going to see more and more need for them to keep doing it.
Would you say a word to us about the difference in philosophy that President Obama has regarding the role of the government and perhaps the traditional American view up until this time? Because it does seem that he has a very expansive view of what the role of government is supposed to be in American life.
Well, as drawn from observations of how his administration has behaved for over 4 years, I would have to agree with you that he does have an unusually expansive view by American standards of the role of the federal government. And put differently, it's hard for me to articulate any perceivable limit on what the president's administration views as the role of government. And government isn't what made America great. Americans are. And the beauty of our governmental system is that we have elevated the individual above the state and treated them the same as every other individual, given them the liberty to pursue whatever their version of happiness is, but that isn't the guarantee of happiness. It's the opportunity to pursue it, and the vigorousness with which we've all been doing that through American history has made us the greatest nation in the history of the world, and that liberty is very much threatened. It's interesting, just a couple of weeks ago, the Pew Research folks who do surveys on everything known to man came out with a survey where for the first time ever, a majority of Americans concluded that the federal government is a serious threat to their rights and liberties. And so it would seem that our efforts here out in the states to preserve those liberties are very much in the mainstream of where ordinary Americans are, maybe not the Washington Post and the New York Times, but ordinary Americans seem to agree with us. And they have an innate sense, I think, about the first principles of this country, which we're defending.
We're talking with Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli. He's the author of a brand new book called The Last Line of Defense, The New Fight for American Liberty, just published by Random House. Mr. Cuccinelli, in your book, you've got a chapter called Subjects or Citizens. That raises a great question of how Americans traditionally have seen themselves that we are not subjects serving a king. We are citizens in a free republic. What's the importance of the difference of the way we see ourselves?
Well, let's play it out in the real world. Where that concept came from was the healthcare case, and the notion by the president and his Democratic allies that they could order us to buy a product, in this case health insurance. That has never happened before. No one's ever claimed the power on the part of the federal government to do that before. And it's so historically stark an attempt at exercising power that we can go back into the colonial era before 1776. From 1765 to 75, America was boycotting British goods because of the Stamp Act and the Intolerable Acts and other things that they were imposing on us without our say-so. And at that time, the Attorney General and Solicitor General for King George III sat in Parliament, again by tradition, and they were asked, isn't this boycott by these colonists treason? And the answer was that the colonists have come up to the line, but they haven't crossed it. Now let's think about that for a moment. This boycotting King George III, the tyrant against whom we rebelled, was not treason. Flipping that coin over, they essentially said they cannot order us to buy British goods, right? But we have a president who believes he can. So at that time, we were subjects. We weren't citizens. We fought for that, at the time, thought inestimable honor of the title of citizens. And here we are fighting again with our federal government, our own government that was established to protect the very liberty that we're struggling with them over. And they're the greatest threat to it right now. I would point out that in the book, we catalog just example after example of this, whether it's the FCC, it's healthcare, the EPA, the list goes on and on. Unfortunately, the list goes on and on. But it is worth remembering that the founders expected those of us in the states to push back. James Madison, good Virginian, in the Federalist Papers, talked about the role states would play in preserving liberty against an overreaching federal government. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're doing exactly what the founders had in mind for us, and it's very clear from the Pew poll that the American people agree with us.
Let me ask you something specifically about Obamacare. I think the general perception out there is, well, the Supreme Court upheld Obamacare, the president was reelected, the debate is over. Is that your view? And if it's not, what can be done to either roll back or forestall or do something about Obamacare?
Well, it is not my view, and it's worth people knowing that there were 4 constitutional arguments made in the healthcare case. And we being the small government, the limited government side, won 3 of them, and 2 of them were landmark. The first one was that the federal government couldn't just order us to buy a product under the Commerce Clause. That was too extreme an exercise of that power. We actually won that argument. The shock is we won that argument and still lost the case because the Chief Justice read the taxing power as so outrageously broad. Literally no one had briefed the case out of 100-plus briefs. No one had asked for the outcome the Chief Justice delivered. But we also won 2 other constitutional arguments on the Necessary and Proper Clause, and more importantly, on the spending power of the federal government. The Supreme Court, by a really surprising 7-2 vote, found that the federal government may not hold federal money over the heads of states to threaten them to join a new program like the healthcare program. And so what that delivered to us in the states was the ability to not join the Medicaid expansion, to have a meaningful discussion about whether that's a course that we wanted to go down or not. And we're having that debate. It's still a live one here in Virginia now. It's not just in the last line of defense. I'm running for governor. It's going to be a central part of the discussion in the governor's race. And, that's something that we're going to that we're going to pursue vigorously. I don't think this is over at all. This debate is ongoing, and these fights, many little fights is what it amounts to, are going on all over the country, being brought to you by a bunch of attorneys general.
We're talking with Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, who has written excellent new book called The Last Line of Defense, The New Fight for American Liberty, just published by Random House. You've got a chapter in there called, in fact, it's the very first chapter in your book, called The Biggest Set of Lawbreakers in America. Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about the entire federal administration. This administration has so brazenly and frequently broken the law and trampled the Constitution. It's simply without precedent in my lifetime at the federal level. And so this brings us back to the founders. This was a concern they had, was that the federal government would accumulate too much power and start running amok with that power. And that's what's going on here. It is a great tragedy that the American people did not check this at the last election by deposing this president. That is a tragedy, but it doesn't change the fact that they're regularly and continually breaking the law.
Mr. Cuccinelli, your book, The Last Line of Defense, begs a question. What is the last line of defense? What's the bottom line? What is the last line of defense here?
Well, obviously, elections have a role to play. That didn't go how I would have liked to have seen in November. But states are always there, and we are the last line of defense within the system that's been set up by our founders to push back on the federal government. And we're winning. Here, it doesn't mean we win everywhere, but you know what? You don't win if you don't fight. And so many people are too worried about losing that they don't even get into the fight. And we need to keep pushing back on the federal government. And that's something we're doing in Virginia. It's happening all across the country, Michigan, Florida, Arizona, Oklahoma. It's going on all over the country. And there's a good bit of coordination amongst attorneys general who are interested in this. I would note that there is a growing difference between Republican attorneys general and Democrat attorneys general. Only one of them is inclined to defend liberty, and that did not used to be the case. It used to be that all these states' attorneys general would get together to push back on the federal government. Now you've got these left-wing ideological decision makers as attorneys general in other states, Democrats in other states, and they are not making decisions based on what's in the interest of their state. They're making ideological decisions. They're not defending the principles as it relates to freedom of action of states and throwing off the impositions of the federal government. That's a big problem. But it isn't just the federal elections. People can help this battle by electing the right people as governor, the right people as attorney general. Those positions matter in this battle. And that is the last line of defense. It's out at the states.
Your book comes to an end with a chapter entitled, I thought very creatively, The Liberty Pie. What's that all about?
I'm glad you liked it because it's my favorite part of the book.
Good. Tell us about that.
A lot of people remember Ronald Reagan and the economic pie. You can grow the pie, you can shrink the pie with good economic policies or bad ones. And the liberty pie doesn't shrink and it doesn't grow. It always stays the same size. And there are two slices of that pie, government power and citizens' freedom. And every single thing, whether it's taxing, more spending, and that does reduce our liberty, or more regulations, those are the three things that government does to expand its power and its reach. Every single one of those reduces the freedom of Americans. It's a zero-sum game, And unfortunately, we have a government now that feels that it can and occasionally succeeds in just taking our liberty from us. It isn't something that's done at the ballot box. That's why I'm so disturbed by the November outcome. But the liberty pie is an analogy to remind people that there is a cost. Every time government does more of anything, it may be something you think government should be doing. But don't forget, there is still a cost, and it comes at the cost of your freedom and your liberty. And that's something that we tried to remind people as they head out of the book at the tail end there. It's to me the most important part of the book because it's more dealing with the eternal propositions at stake, not just the stories about the various battles we've been in.
As you look at those battles, Mr. Cuccinelli, are you, and look into the future, at least in the short term, are you more optimistic or more pessimistic about the future for liberty in our nation?
You know, I wax and wane. When I see something like the state of Michigan become a right-to-work state, I think, oh my gosh,